We thought the ocean was too big to fail, that we didn't have to protect it. But I've been a witness. We're seeing species after species winked out. We're looking at more than 1 million species lost. Only about 3% of the ocean is protected. That means 97% is open for exploitation. We're on the brink. We need to rethink our relationship with the oceans. Do unto fish as you would have them do unto you.
Of Extinction Rebellion's literary chapter, Writers Rebel. Our first On the Brink event was dedicated to some of the most threatened species on the planet, from the snow leopard to the eastern gorilla to the pangolin, and our second showcased some of its smallest, insects. Today we turn our attention to oceans and the creatures that dwell in the planet's largest ecosystem and rely on its survival, on its welfare for their survival. Less than 3% of the ocean is protected. This leaves 97% open to exploitation, and we're exploiting it to the brink of devastation. The High Seas Treaty drawn up by the UN this past week is tremendously welcome news and comes not a moment too soon. From oil spills to supertrawler bycatch, overfishing to plastic and landfill waste, human beings are mindlessly destroying this vital, precious ecosystem. Each year, ghost nets trap and drown thousands and thousands of sea turtles, seals, and cetaceans. Half of seabirds are in decline.
Recording in progress.
And a third threatened with extinction. Coral reefs are dying at a terrifying rate, and monstrous dead zones are expanding where life once thrived. Without a healthy ocean, the Earth will rapidly become uninhabitable. And if the ocean were to die, we would soon follow. We've called this evening Oceans on the Brink because this is the stark truth of where we are. But it's not too late to act and rescue this integral part of the vast web of life. I'm now delighted to introduce you to Laline Paul, our compere for the evening. Laline is a novelist, screenwriter, and playwright. Her debut novel, The Bees, is a science-based thriller set in a beehive. It was nominated for the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction and is being adapted for the stage by the National Theatre. Her second novel, the environmental thriller, The Ice, focused on the shady links between business, conservation, and politics in the Arctic. And her most recent novel, Pod, last night was longlisted for the 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction, an immersive migration epic that follows the fortunes of two estranged dolphin tribes fighting for survival in a corrupted ocean. Laline is a voting member of BAFTA, the Writers Guild of America, and is also alongside Writers Rebel and Money Rebellion at their protest against fossil fuel lobbyists in London. She was the compere for our second On the Brink, Insect to Get On, and we're thrilled to have her back with us tonight. Laline, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and welcome everybody. And it's great to see some really exciting speakers on the grid in front of me. I don't know how many people are out there, but it's brilliant that you could make it. And first, some good news. As Chloe just mentioned, the High Seas Treaty. So late on Saturday, the 4th of March, after 2 decades of negotiation, coalition, struggle, and compromise, and despite an overrun deadline and more than 48 hours in the room getting it over the line, the Treaty for the High Seas was passed at the UN in New York, which is just such a massive win for ocean protection. And the high seas means international waters, means the area of ocean outside territorial boundaries, which has been a free-for-all until now. And this treaty provides a legal framework for establishing vast MPAs, marine protected areas, something that you'll be hearing hopefully a lot more about. And the treaty also establishes a conference of the parties, or COP, that'll meet periodically and hold the participants to account. So I've watched this little clip of film several times because it makes me feel so good. And it is the moment when the UN conference president, Rena Lee, makes it official. So just sit back and enjoy this really good news happening now.
Good evening-ish, ladies and gentlemen. The ship has reached the shore.
I love how emotional I still feel watching that, because it's true. Something good has really just happened. So we should all take heart, because a better world isn't just possible. It is happening in little pieces amidst the doom scrolling, but it is happening. And that's one of the real triumphs of tonight. But there aren't any wins without defeats along the way, without blood, sweat, tears, and colossal legal fees. But our will is there, our need is there, and our ocean is still there. So we can save it. And tonight it's my pleasure to introduce many people who are, quite simply, but in a number of very sophisticated ways, ocean champions. But first I have to share some bad news as well as the good, which is that Dr. Sylvia Earle, also known as Her Deepness, and one of the most important scientists in the world, has not been able to join us tonight. So the only good news is it spares us all my embarrassing fangirling all over her, if I can say that at my age. But I will tell you a bit about her for anyone who doesn't know. So Dr. Sylvia Earle is an American marine biologist, oceanographer, explorer, author, lecturer. She has been a National Geographic Explorer in residence since 1998 and was the first female chief scientist of the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and named by Time magazine as its first hero for the planet in 1998. So on International Women's Day, it is fantastic to celebrate her. And I'm going to hold up this amazing book, which, wait a minute, tell me when you can see it. So this is a whopper of a book. It'll keep any door open in a storm, but it is fantastic. And I highly recommend anyone get it. It's like a marine biology degree between two great big covers. I'm going to read from her in her own words, as she's not here, from The World is Blue, How Our Fate and the Oceans Are One. And Sylvia Earle says, even if you never have the chance to see or touch the ocean touches you with every breath you take, every drop of water you drink, every bite you consume. Everyone, everywhere is inextricably connected to and utterly dependent on the existence of the sea. So, should we race to see how quickly we can consume the last swordfish, tuna, and grouper, or race to see what can be done to protect what remains? Because for now, there is still a choice. Our near and distant predecessors might be forgiven for exterminating the last woolly mammoth, the ultimate dodo, the final sea cow, and the last living monk seal, for lack of understanding of the consequences of their actions. But who will forgive us if we fail to learn from past and present experiences? Who will forgive us if we fail to forge new values, new relationships, and a new level of respect for the natural systems that keep us alive? She says, knowing is the key to caring, and with caring, there is hope that people will be motivated to take positive action. They might not care even if they know, but they can't care if they are unaware. And the people I'm about to introduce tonight care, know, and are dedicated champions of the planet. I'm very happy now to introduce Callum Roberts. Callum Roberts is Professor of Marine Conservation in the Centre for Ecology and Conservation at the University of Exeter's Cornwall campus. His research focuses on threats to marine ecosystems and species and on finding the means to protect them. His main interests involve documenting the impacts of fishing on marine life and his award-winning book, The Unnatural History of the Sea, charts the effect of 1,000 years of exploitation of ocean life. And his memoir, Reef Life, discusses how he fell in love with coral reefs. Callum will be talking about coral reefs tonight, live from Cornwall. Callum.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I'm just going to share my screen so that we can see the coral reefs that I'm going to be talking about. I hope you can all see that displayed in front of you now. Coral reefs are just extraordinary marine ecosystems, and they are the richest in the sea. They are also probably the most threatened ecosystem on the planet as a result of human activities and particularly climate change. This photograph was taken only last December by Alex Mustard, a very excellent underwater photographer, and it's from the heart of the Coral Triangle in Indonesia, and shows coral reefs are still out there in their pristine and splendid, resplendent form, but not all of them are. So what I want to do is to just give you a little tour back in time and explore the reefs of Bonaire in the Caribbean. And I went back there after 28 years last year and repeated a survey that I first undertook in 1994, in which we measured the composition of the seabed, and we counted fish in those areas. Well, my team went back last year and did the entire survey exactly the same way again. So what do we find? Well, what I want to do is to show you the taking of the pulse of the coral reefs of Bonaire. And the first thing is that living hard coral cover, the corals that are building the reefs, have fallen by nearly 50% over that timeline. And that is a really dramatic change. Obviously, that space is being taken up by something else, but it's not much of it is dead or inert substrates, things like sand, rubble, or bare rock. But quite a bit of it is living substrates that are things like gorgonians, sea fans, sea whips, sponges, and so forth. And so they've increased in area, but also increasing in area is something that wasn't really visible in 1994. These are the blue-green algae, and they're not very good for coral reefs or for coral health. Nor are macroalgae, that's the seaweeds that are very visible, fleshy seaweeds. And the seaweeds that are really good for corals, which are the coralline algae, crustose coralline algae, which are places that corals settle, those have diminished in size. So looking at this as a coral scientist, I would say that the reef is not really in good shape now. And if I were a doctor to people, I'd say, look, you've got a problem. You're overweight, your blood sugar's too high, your blood pressure's too high, you're going to have to change your lifestyle. Unfortunately, the lifestyle that this reef has to change is ours, and we're the ones who need to shift our lifestyles if coral reefs are going to be saved over the long term. And it wasn't as if coral reefs in Bonaire were pristine during the first survey. In fact, we were too late to see them in their pristine state. During the 1980s, the two major species of reef-building coral, the elkhorn coral and the staghorn coral, died as a result of disease epidemics that swept through the Caribbean. And years later, we found out what caused them. Would you believe a human gut bacterium transferred into the ocean via sewage effluents? The big corals are still out there, but if you look at this image, it's a bit of an optical illusion, but it's no illusion. There is clear space underneath this coral colony looking through the reef now. They're still there, but they're hanging in, they're on the edge. What we also did was to count fish. And from some of the main families of reef fish, the grunts, the snappers, the parrotfish, the groupers, and the surgeonfish, we looked at how many there were back in 1994 and how many there are now. And the results were surprising and also quite encouraging. And if you look at these counts, the green bars are 1994, the blue bars are 2022, and both abundance and biomass, that's the weight of fish per count, are almost identical between those 2 years in which we were looking at them. So the reefs, the impression gained by me of those reefs is that they were rich still in fish. They were beautiful. And they're still an extraordinary ecosystem. And they're changing rapidly as the world changes. And I will leave you with this. This is a community of corals. This is a mix of corals that I didn't see in 1994. These habitats are reshaping themselves as the world changes. And what we're seeing in ecosystems all across the planet is that they are still managing in many cases, and they're still adapting and changing over time. If you want the long answer to what I think, oh, that's my timer going off. If you want the long answer on how reefs are faring under climate change and what the future holds, then I'd encourage you to look at my book, Reef Life. But that's just a snapshot, really, of how change is taking place in one reef in one place, which is emblematic of pretty much everywhere. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Callum. That's really shocking that in 20 years that can happen, but 20 years is long enough to grow a whole new adult person. And I love what you say about the doctor to patient relationship, and that we are actually the patient and we have to change our lifestyle, which we know is very hard if we have physical habits, but to get back to a rich and beautiful world and health, we have to do it. So thank you for that. And Callum's book is Reef Life by Callum Roberts. And our next speaker is Chris Armstrong. Chris is a professor of political theory at the University of Southampton and the author of A New Blue Deal, Why We Need a New Politics for the Ocean, which was recently named one of the New Statesman's Books of the Year for 2022. Congratulations. He's a supporter of Extinction Rebellion and Ocean Rebellion, and one of his goals is to help inspire a more democratic and radical politics for the ocean in a time of environmental crisis. Joining us now from Southampton, it's Chris Armstrong.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here in such amazing company. I've been really looking forward to this. So I want to begin with the theme of crisis. And I think lots of us are now familiar with the idea that the ocean is facing this multifaceted environmental crisis. So climate change is driving ocean warming, acidification. We know about plastic pollution. We may know about nitrogen pollution in the ocean that's often caused by agriculture, the growth of dead zones, the effects of industrial fishing. What I try and claim in my work is that at the same time as that multifaceted environmental crisis, we face a second crisis, which is a crisis of inequality. So the ocean economy, for various reasons, is even more unequal than our economies back on dry land. There's a big gulf between the haves and the have-nots. It's been shown that in just about any sector of the ocean economy, about half of all the revenues are taken by about 10 keystone corporations. So truly unequal. And what I thought I might talk about briefly is how we got here, how we got to this position facing these two crises. And I'm just going to briefly talk about three things. So firstly, I think it's really interesting to talk about intellectual origins. So if we look at the law of the sea, the person who's often seen as the intellectual godfather of the law of the sea, a Dutch thinker called Hugo Grotius, wrote a book in the early 1600s called The Free Sea, or Mare Liberum. And Grotius was a stern defender of freedom to fish, freedom to exploit, freedom of the ocean. And his justification for that freedom was essentially the view that the riches of the ocean are basically unlimited, infinite. Nothing we've ever done to the ocean, he claimed, has fundamentally altered its state. Now, we now know that this is obviously false, right? So Callum's work has been a terrific inspiration to me in revealing the past vibrancy of the ocean and the denuded state that ocean ecosystems now have. We really have been pummeling the ocean. Nevertheless, on the high seas, which is 60% of the ocean by surface area, freedom of the sea, freedom to exploit, freedom to fish is still the norm. So as Lillian mentioned, we now have this High Seas Treaty at the weekend, which is terrific news. And what that provides us with is a framework. In principle, we could get to 30% protection of the ocean. We could even go beyond that. But it is at present just a framework. We actually have to do that. So I think one of the big tasks is to push our politicians, our leaders, continually to escalate those goals and to actually meet those goals. Second thing I thought I would talk about brings us closer to home. So away from the high seas, in each country's individual bit of marine territory, its exclusive economic zone, we see a picture of the excessive power of fishing lobbies, even as industrialized fishing employs fewer and fewer people, even as fishing chases fewer and fewer fish. It attracts huge subsidies, subsidized destruction, which is bizarre in many ways. We see the power of the fossil fuel lobby. There are rules within exclusive economic zones. The law of the sea tells each country that it ought to preserve and protect its coastal ecosystems, but those rules are highly permissive. We see some examples of good stewardship, but we also see many countries which just lack the capacity to protect coastal ecosystems. So one famous example is West Africa, one of the poorest parts of the world, with these really rich marine ecosystems where something like 40% of all fish are caught illegally. And the local states just don't really have the capacity to do anything about that in many cases. Other states are just not interested in protecting coastal ecosystems. It's a really interesting question to ask why that might be. Possibly we might point to the revolving door between politics, civil service, big business. The third thing I wanted to talk about is the flip side. And really we can start there with a question, which is, where is the democratic politics of the ocean? Obviously, there are marine scientists, some of them are in this room, who do a wonderful job of raising awareness of the problems that the ocean faces. But once we are aware of those problems, what do we do then? Do politicians, do political parties campaign on ocean-related issues? That's a rhetorical question. They don't, right? You look in vain through their manifestos. They do have, it seems to me, visions of the ocean's future, but they're often highly industrialized, highly inegalitarian, highly exclusive, but they're not held to account for them. So I think what we need, first of all, is a vibrant politics of the ocean. Where is that going to come from? From meetings like this, from Extinction Rebellion, from Ocean Rebellion that I'm proud to be a part of, from civil society, from below. I think we have to at least make our politicians lay out their visions of the ocean's future. And once they've done that, we can articulate our own alternative futures from below. That's the challenge I think that we face.
Chris, that was so fantastic to hear, and I was scribbling away, and I will definitely be buying Chris's book, which again is called A New Blue Deal, Why We Need a New Politics for the Ocean. Who publishes you, Chris? Chris?
It's Yale University Press, and the paperback is coming out next month.
Great, we love paperbacks. Okay, subsidized destruction. This is crazy. We are living in crazy times. And the thing, I just have to say, did I write this down correctly, that half the revenue of the blue economy is taken by 10 keystone companies? Is that?
That's right. So in different sectors of the ocean economy, they are different companies, right? But in any sector we find, we have this highly kind of oligarchic structure. 10 companies dominate each of those sectors. Okay,
obviously we could talk about this for a lot longer, but I will read your book, and thank you so much. So next up we have Lucy Gilliam. Hi, Lucy. Dr. Lucy Gilliam is Senior Shipping Policy Officer at Seas at Risk. She's an environmental scientist and policy specialist with over 20 years experience developing science-based policies and campaigns focused on international transport, science-based policy and campaigns, international transport, ocean governments, and ecosystem-based management. Lucy's responsible for Seas at Risk's work on shipping and system change, the Arctic, and EU shipping advocacy. Prior to joining Seas at Risk, Lucy managed aviation and shipping campaigns at Transport and Environment and co-founded Expedition, curating all women's sailing voyages to research plastics and toxics in the world's ocean. Lucy joins us now from Brussels. Welcome, Lucy.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's really great to be with such an awesome lineup and to see some friends here as well. As already said, I work for a Brussels-based oceans NGO. We're a member-based NGO, so we represent various members across Europe, and I do policy making both at an EU level and at a UN level via the International Maritime Organization. And we're working on rules to clean up shipping. When it comes to oceans and the blue economy, one of the things that I've kind of noticed over the years is somehow when we're talking about oceans and blue economy, sometimes shipping gets left out. And so talking to some authors when they've written books about blue economy, say, okay, so what have you written about shipping? And they go, well, we didn't actually cover shipping in this book. And I'm like, why is that? Why does shipping end up sometimes being left out of the oceans issues when it's actually a very major industrial activity that's taking place on our high seas? But somehow in some forums, it ends up in this place of transport and not in like oceans or biodiversity issues. Anyway, so I really appreciate the invitation to come here and to talk about shipping and its impact on the oceans and the environment. Shipping is, as I said, it's a major industry. It's carrying energy and materials around the world, and it's an industry that underpins modern life. So 90% of pretty much everything around us at some point has been transported by ship. But it's one of those industries that, to the most part, for most people, is completely invisible. Unless you're living, close to a port or you've been on a ferry or a cruise ship. That's probably the extent of most people's experience of shipping. But it is an industry that has a large environmental footprint, and it is growing. And I think it got a lot more visibility in the last years with COVID, with the kind of supply chain chaos, and with really big incidents like Ever Given that's kind of catapulted it a bit more into public consciousness, which is great because it is a major contributor to kind of ocean damage. And so emissions that are problematic from shipping, we've got discharges of oil, chemical, sewage and grey water, particularly coming from big ships like cruise ships. There's also plastic waste that's coming from shipping, not just from passenger ships, but also from the fishing industry, which uses ships. And we've got garbage, acidic wastewater coming from the exhaust gas cleaning systems that are on some vessels, which lead to toxic ocean pollution. We also see that there are regular accidents or cargo that's lost overboard, so regular large-scale container loss. There was one actually yesterday, another container ship losing lots of things. We saw a couple of years ago a really massive spill of plastic nurdles on the beaches in Sri Lanka. We also see that paints that are used to keep the bottom of ships free from biofouling leaching chemicals into surrounding water. Ships are also a key source of underwater noise pollution. This is particularly damaging to marine biodiversity and to species like whales, dolphins, and sharks, as it harms their ability to communicate with each other. And ships also pose a regular and deadly threat if they collide with whales and other cetaceans. So ships like running over whales is a major kind of a human mortality and to these species. And ships damage biodiversity through invasive transfer of invasive species. So the growth of both the industry and the average size of ships are also destroying important coastal ecosystems as we expand ports. So ports generally require dredging in order to be developed and expanded and to keep shipping lanes open. And so that dredging waste can also have an environmental impact, leading to emissions, climate emissions from that dredging waste, but also mobilization of toxics. And the scrapping and the poorly regulated scrapping and recycling of ships on beaches in developing countries is definitely, it's a human rights eyesore on the industry. The industry also uses flags of convenience, this whole flag state system, this UN system of flagging vessels enables shipping companies to evade labor and environmental controls. And there's a very bizarre tonnage tax scheme, which enables the industry to pay virtually no taxes, so it's also there's a kind of a tax justice issue here as well. So the shipping industry is contributing to the climate and biodiversity crisis, but it's also a threat to social and economic justice worldwide. Now, I'm going to talk mostly now about shipping's climate impact, because ships are currently all mostly powered by fossil fuels, in particular toxic, heavy, bottom of the barrel, tar-like fuel, heavy fuel oil, which contributes towards climate emissions. Shipping has a significant climate footprint, and if it were a country, it would be the sixth largest emitter, so similar to Germany or Japan, and the emissions from this sector are still growing. The industry is regulated by the UN agency called the International Maritime Organization, which is based in London. And this is the forum where the nations come together to develop the global rules. And this year in July, member states at the IMO are coming together to revise the climate strategy for the industry and update the 2018 plan in line with the Paris Agreement. So at the moment, the industry is committed to halving emissions by 2050. However, this is simply not enough. In order to keep within the Paris Agreement goals and to limit heating to 1.5 degrees, we really need to be getting to zero way before 2050 and actually halving emissions by 2030. So this is a really pivotal moment that's happening this summer, where everybody's come together to revise the strategy and to put policies and measures in place in order to actually bring down emissions now and set the industry on a path to wean itself off fossil fuels and get within ecosystem boundaries. So is it possible to actually meet these targets? Is it possible to have this level of ambition and to reduce emissions from the sector? Well, it is a very good question, and it depends on how you look at it. It is super challenging. These are some of the biggest machines on Earth. You know, ships consume, you know, thousands of tons of fuel a day, moving products around the world, and replacing that fuel is going to be is very, very challenging. So, you know, and this challenge is made worse by the fact that demand for shipping services is increasing. More stuff being being moved around, more consumer demand is making this problem harder. So the issue of the climate footprint doesn't just rest with the shipping industry, but it's also, as society, we need to confront our energy and material footprints as well. If we consume less, we redesign services, create regenerative local economies and reduce single-use plastics, etc. This could reduce shipping demand. But we also do need to, you know, finger the industry and wean it off fossil fuels. So one of the ways to do this is operating ships differently and building cleaner ships. So a lot of emissions are tied to how fast ships travel.
I can hear you.
Sorry, have I done something wrong? Is everything okay?
I think so.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I didn't know whether. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'll get. So yeah, so ships operating fast burn more fuel. So slowing ships down, you not only save fuel, you hit less whales, you reduce ocean noise. You can also use new technologies like wind propulsion. So this is not going back to the past. There's loads of modern wind technology that can reduce emissions. And it's possible to electrify some ships. So coastal shipping and ferries in particular have already been electrified. So there's lots of potential here. And the remaining energy can be produced by renewables. But we always need to be mindful that we mustn't waste energy, even if it's renewable energy, and the cleanest fuel will always be the one that we don't need to burn. So ultimately, to protect the oceans, we do need to shift society away from wasteful linear economies to more regenerative and circular ways of living, to lead to less pollution and less industrial activity on our oceans, which I think really echoes things that have already been said by Chris and by Callum before me. So thank you very much. I'm also very pleased to hear about this High Oceans Treaty, and definitely we've got a lot of hard work to do now at the International Maritime Organization to bring that energy to that space and get more ambitious rules there. Thank you very much.
So much to scribble down, and I picked up on you saying slowing things down and better energy. I mean, that's a good rule for life, isn't it?
It definitely is, and it would make a huge difference with shipping, because there's a cubic relationship between fuel burn and speed. So you slow ships down a bit and they consume much less fuel and run over less whales.
Yes, I'm going to talk about that when it's my turn to have my bit, but thank you so much again. That was brilliant. And now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Harry Ekman. Harry is an international animal welfare specialist with over 20 years experience. He's the CEO of the World Cetacean Alliance, the world's largest marine conservation partnership. He's got a lifelong passion for the ocean and its protection, protecting not only cetaceans, but their environments, the communities they live alongside, and the places they all call home. And joining us now from his home in Portugal, it's Harry Ekman. Harry Ekman? Harry Ekman? Where is Harry Ekman?
I'm here. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Lily. Hi, Lillian. It's a pleasure to be here and to share this evening with such an inspirational lineup of other speakers. I want to talk today about the humpback whale, and I want to use the humpback whale as a way of demonstrating the importance of whale song into how we are protecting the oceans. So I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully. Bear with me. Can you see my screen? Can you just see the whale bit, or can you see the whole screen? Apologies, I'm having a technical problem here. There we go. What you're hearing now is the sound of a humpback whale singing. And you've probably heard a sound like this many times without actually knowing the importance of it. But it's fair to say that the song of the humpback whale is one of the reasons why we actually still have whales in the ocean today. When people think about whaling, they often think and have images in their head like this one and presume that the classic period of whaling was when it was at its worst. But actually, it was the 20th century that saw the greatest devastation of whale populations, when over 3 million whales were killed. And in the 1960s and 70s, whaling reached its catastrophic heights, with more than 70,000 whales each year being slaughtered. At that time, the number of humpback whales plummeted to only around 5,000 individuals. In 1967, Roger Payne, one of the pioneers of ocean protection, was studying the behavior of whales, and he was listening to recordings of humpbacks. And as he listened, he had this moment of realization, something that we actually now accept and understand, but at the time it was revelatory. The sounds that he was listening to were repeating patterns. They were made up of units of specific pitches and phrasing. What he was hearing was the structure of music, and what he was listening to was a whale singing. What he did was he produced and published a spectrograph, a visual representation of what it was that he was hearing, published in Science magazine. And then in 1970, he released an album, Song of the Humpback Whale, and it sold 125,000 copies. It went multi-platinum, and its success saw everyone from international news outlets to the biggest entertainment names of the day talking about whale song in a way that they had never done before. Then a few years later, in 1979, National Geographic included a pressed disc of Roger's whale song in its January edition. 10.5 million copies of whale song circulated the earth. And to this day, it actually remains the largest single print order of any recording ever made. Now, because we now know how intelligent and empathetic whales are and how complex and rich their lives are, it's hard to imagine the importance that this had and the change in perception of whales that this created. But the effect was seismic. Now, together with the activism of the recently formed Greenpeace, and obviously we have Paul Watson, one of its founders, also on this evening, this new understanding of whales and the resulting public pressure culminated in the International Whaling Commission's moratorium on commercial whaling, which saw it banned in 1986. Despite, unfortunately, there still being small pockets of whaling going on today, this is an example of a generation-defining achievement in conservation and animal protection. When there's global will, we can affect global change. Today, the number of humpbacks has risen to well over 100,000, back to pre-industrial whaling numbers. And in so many ways, this can be regarded as an incredible success. But as successful as we've been, the threats to whales today are sadly more abundant and more widespread than they were in 1986. There are 3 billion more people on Earth than there were back then, and the threats to the ocean are now coming from every direction, from plastic pollution and sound pollution to ocean traffic to industrialized fishing. We save the whales from slaughter only to now threaten them and their habitats and every other species in the ocean in 100 other ways. But as in 1986, where there's global will, we can affect global change. Organizations around the world, like mine and others, the World Cetacean Alliance, are striving to affect change, to protect whales and to save our oceans and ultimately to save our planet. And this is the future of this is important. Back in 1971, NASA's Voyager space probe was launched to explore the solar system, and it carried with it a gold-plated copper disc, and it contained encoded images and sounds of life on Earth. And along with the greetings in 55 languages, Roger's whale song was also a representation of life on this planet, the only non-human voice singing a song that we ourselves don't even understand. And in 2026, there's a new project utilizing AI language translation algorithms and using the largest sample size of whale communication ever gathered. And it hopes to be able to decode the language of sperm whales. And this is something that you can read about in my colleague Tom Mustel's exceptional book, How to Speak Whale. If in 2026 we are finally able to understand the language of whales, to speak to them and to acknowledge the impact that we have on them, how might that change how we treat our oceans? Hopefully, we still have some time to find out. Thank you.
Yay, Harry. That was fantastic. Global will equals global change. We know this. Oceans don't have boundaries, and I don't think people should have boundaries either. We need a global government, but that's for another. I won't get into that now, but I am going to be speaking. I'll be doing an event with Tom Mustel next week at Backstory Books in London.
Oh, he's amazing.
Yeah, so I'll enjoy talking to him about How to Speak Whale. That is a great book. And I'm fascinated by the work going on in Dominica at Project SETI as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, so much to say about that, and so incredibly upsetting to think that we did those things so recently and are still doing things now by neglect and paralysis, really. But there is hope. Global will equals global change. So next up, we have the author, Susan Richardson. Susan Richardson is a writer, performer, and educator. And in her latest book, Where the Seals Sing, she learns not only how Atlantic grey seals live, but how we should live more sensitively with them. Susan is also a poet. Her fourth and most recent collection, Words the Turtle Taught Me, themed around endangered ocean species, emerged from her residency with the Marine Conservation Society and was shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award. Congratulations, Susan, that's fantastic. She's currently writer-in-residence with both the Global Animal Welfare Initiative, World Animal Day, and also the British Animal Studies Network. And joining us now from the west coast of Wales is Susan Richardson.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Lillian, and thanks so much to everyone who is watching and listening this evening. I'm so happy to be part of this event. Every autumn, close to my home on the west coast of Wales, immensely pregnant Atlantic grey seals lumber ashore to give birth to their white-coated pups. Bull seals also launch themselves onto the beach to wrestle for mating rights, and gangs of great black-backed gulls screech in to tussle over the placentas. As the season unfolds, older pups learn to swim in the swash of waves, and on those rare occasions when the sea is calm, I can hear the tug and gulp of the younger pups suckling. It's such a privilege to be privy to the intimate behaviours of these extraordinary animals. As a species, the grey seal is globally rare, confined as it is to the Baltic and the northeast and northwest Atlantic, with the UK hosting an important 40% of the world population. We've coexisted with grey seals for thousands of years. Their bone remains have been found at Iron and Bronze Age archaeological sites in Scotland, as well as at one site from the Mesolithic period, more than 6,000 years ago. In more recent centuries, our relationship with grey seals has been a tangled one. On the one hand, they've plunged into the waters of our psyche, inspiring shape-shifting selkie tales, swimming through our cultural and spiritual lives. As writer David Thompson says of grey seals in his lyrical narrative, The People of the Sea, land animals may play their roles in legend, but none, not even the hare, has such a dreamlike effect on the human mind. Yet on the other hand, usually in response to the human-induced decline in fish populations, the species has been scapegoated and demonised, and there have been culls, both guerrilla and government-sanctioned, to reduce their numbers. Culls were carried out on the Farne Islands and Orkney in the 50s, 60s and 70s, and as recently as 2020, prior to new legislation, licences were still being issued to permit the shooting of grey seals around salmon farms and to protect other fisheries interests. Grey seals are experiencing a whole host of other anthropogenic threats now too, and one of my original impulses for going on my round Britain journey was to gain a more acute appreciation of these, learning from the marine scientists, sanctuary care workers, rangers, and other experts who I met en route. Some of these threats you'll be familiar with, and they've already been mentioned this evening as they affect other marine mammals too, and in fact the whole ocean ecosystem. There's marine debris, for example, in which grey seals can become fatally entangled, ingestion of microplastics, toxic pollutants. Even though bans started to be introduced in the 70s and 80s, a cocktail of contaminants still lingers in the marine environment. They're even found in grey seal pups who've never yet been to sea or eaten any fish, as pollutants that have accumulated over the years in cow seals' blubber are transferred into the milk on which they feed their young. Repeated disturbances to seals when they're hauled out on land are also a problem. These disturbances may come from insensitively led wildlife tourism, drones, boats, jet skis. And if seals are persistently flushed into the sea when they're trying to rest and digest, that can lead over the long term to serious physiological disruption and a reduction in breeding success. Looking ahead, I feel that one of the greatest threats to the grey seal is our complacency. The species is not classed as endangered, and some breeding colonies, especially along the east coast of the UK, are currently doing well. Yet it's impossible to quantify the synergy of all the hazards I've mentioned, and it's dangerous to assume that in the face of their cumulative impact, the grey seal population will remain sustainable. And what other threats might be looming? Well, climate change could give rise to potentially devastating new viruses, and it will continue to cause storms and storm surges that can destroy breeding colonies. In 2017, ex-Hurricane Ophelia claimed the lives of 3/4 of the pups on my local wave-battered beach, leaving it populated by just a few starving orphans, dragging themselves across the pebbles, wailing like human babies, desperately trying to suckle every object from rocks to plastic debris with which they came into contact. While I dive more deeply into these and many other issues in Where the Seals Sing, my work of non-fiction, I thought that I'd end with a poem from Words the Turtle Taught Me. This collection grew out of my residency with the Marine Conservation Society, a dream residency, in fact, as I was asked to write 30 poems for 30 threatened ocean species. Among the poems for the endangered angel shark, Atlantic halibut, and undulate ray, a single pinniped poem surged to the surface, and it takes us back to the West Wales beach where we began. Scar. Cliff at full stretch. Gorse grazing face. Twitch of afraid grayling. Watching a seal beach herself beyond the sea's reach. Her skin's narrative punctuated with scrapes and nicks. Comma, colon, quote mark, asterisk, +1 hyper-extended hyphen, emphatic underline, over long minus sign. Shift stiff legs, jag of rock nags left hip like an unanswered question. It's a scar the shape of a fish farmer's blame for his filched salmon stocks, deep as his commitment to fire a fatal shot, as our fixation with propellers and plastic. It's one axis of a graph that exhibits her decline, a horizon from which the sun can't bring itself to rise. It's the line that must never be crossed. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Susan. Obviously, the grey seal is your spirit animal.
I do feel that, yes.
Yeah, it comes through very tangibly. And Susan's most recent work, again, is Words the Turtle Taught Me, shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award. And listening to that beautiful poem and her eloquence about that one 6,000-year-old plus species reminds me of how we're not just talking about healing an ocean for reasons of blue economy or geopolitics. The ocean is our collective soul, and that's why there's so much art about it as well. We can't put it all into words, but we all feel it and we all know it. So thank you again, Susan. Our next speaker, Hugo Taghome, I'm very pleased to introduce. He is Executive Director and Vice President of Oceana in the UK, and previously led the ocean campaigning charity, which is now very famous, Surfers Against Sewage, taking action from the beachfront to the front benches of Parliament, securing government legislation to protect our seas across 4 environmental pillars: plastic pollution, water quality, climate change, and rewilding our ocean. Hugo founded the Plastic Free Communities Movement, the Million Mile Beach Clean, and the Plastic Free Awards. He's also a founding member of the Global Wave Conference. He's part of the Edinburgh University Ocean Leaders Programme and was recently awarded a Doctorate of Science by Exeter University for his services to the marine environment. He was recognised as Environmentalist of the Year 2021 by the Save the Waves Coalition and is joining us live from Truro, Cornwall. Welcome, Hugo. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, and delighted to be here. That was a kind introduction. And hello to everyone tuning in tonight. It's good to be here. I'm honoured to share the event with so many incredible environmentalists and leaders in the space. Look, I think I really wanted to start by congratulating all those that have worked on the High Seas Treaty and the success at the weekend. A big step forward. But there's still lots of work to do, because we have lots of laws already that aren't being enforced and implemented in the right way to protect our ocean, and we need to look at those. So as you've just heard, I spent the last 14 years leading and growing the marine conservation charity Surfers Against Sewage, and as the name suggests, we were very focused on that issue of sewage pollution, a really huge issue in the UK. Our work, our campaigns exposed the huge volume of sewage pollution that water companies are discharging into our rivers and directly into our coastline. Millions of hours of sewage pollution every year, hundreds of thousands of separate sewage pollution events going into our rivers, and those rivers leading down into our amazing coastline here in the UK. And this effectively is, or was, a legal activity as set out in the 1991 Water Industry Act. The scale of the pollution that they're putting into our waters should not be happening. And the real challenge is, as we've heard from some of the other speakers, is laws and laws not being properly enforced, regulation failing. Which leads to this devastating impact of sewage pollution, meaning just 14% of our rivers meet good ecological status, meaning our bathing waters are some of the worst in Europe, if not the worst. And that sewage pollution is terrible for the marine environment. It carries microplastics with it, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, hydrocarbons, toxic chemicals. And the water industry and this issue is really a huge example of what we'd call regulatory capture, the revolving door between government and industry, a failure to regulate properly, and profiteering by what are really some of the most profitable companies in the country, our water industry, at the expense of people and planet. Now, I moved on to lead campaigns at Oceana in the UK recently at the end of last year to really focus on marine protected areas, stopping offshore oil and gas around the UK, and some other issues. And sadly, it's a familiar story around big industry. Last year alone, industrial fishing vessels fished for 136,000 hours in our marine protected areas, 7,000 of those hours being the most harmful trawling and dredging of those sites. Something that is catastrophic for nature in areas that the public believes are protected from this type of rampant industry. And that's sadly not the case. This type of activity, as you know, is some of the most damaging for the marine environment. And we've heard tonight about the blue economy. A really sort of almost euphemistic word that's bandied around. We go to conference, we hear about it, and it's almost sanitized. It makes us all feel that this is somehow good, and it's not going to bring any bad. Now, if we take the terrestrial economy, or we call it the green economy, on land, we cannot follow that example. We've industrialized our landscapes. We've cultivated monocultures. We raise a very small number of animals intensively, which pollute our environment. And if the blue economy could do anything, it's not follow the example of the green economy. We cannot carve up our ocean into different sections for industry. Now, look, industry, and there seems to be a sort of an issue at the moment where where industry expects there to be a continuity of the current economy and business as we approach the blue economy. And sadly, we know that some industries do need to go out of business. I'm sure that we've heard the example of whaling from Harry tonight. I'm sure the whaling industry was up in arms when those laws were passed that helped the humpback whales bounce back from 5,000 to 100,000. But sure thing. And there's going to be industries now that are operating in the waters around the UK and around the world that do need to go out of business, oil and gas being one of the first ones that spring to mind. In this spatial squeeze that we're seeing in our oceans, the one thing that we can't allow to be squeezed out between the tide line of sewage and the offshore oil and gas and industrial fishing is nature itself. That's the one thing we have to create space for. But there is hope. Now, Harry gave an excellent example, and I know there's more work to do, and amazing people like Harry and Paul are leading the charge on this. But there is hope. We've seen, the impact of very strongly enforced international laws and what it can do for our environment. We saw it on whales. We've seen it on the ozone layer. The ozone layer now repairing itself. And we've also seen how governments can act much more quickly in passing laws and implementing laws and resourcing laws. We saw it through the COVID pandemic. Despite all of the tragedy, which touched everyone around the world, we saw a record amount of money being mobilized. We saw laws being passed overnight that controlled all of us as individuals, something that we're told can't happen to industry, something we're told cannot happen for the environment. And we need to make sure it can happen. We've got the blueprint for action. They came together to create a vaccine in just 12 months, something that normally took a decade. So we can see where there's a will, there's a way, and we have to find a way now. We have the frameworks. Fishing in MPAs in the UK should be illegal. In our opinion at Oceana, it is. That's why we've challenged the government on that. We have the laws to protect and restore our ocean, and taking off these huge industrial pressures is an essential part of that. Not in 10 years' time, but immediately. Thank you.
Yay. Great speech, Hugo. It came to me listening. I would really like a transcript of this whole event because I can't keep up and there's so much good stuff. I have a horrible feeling I might have to get involved in doing that. But yeah, no spatial squeeze on nature. And also you made me think that, yes, the oil and gas industries will want compensation or might ask for it in the same way that slave owners used to. Slave owners got compensation in abolition. And, the world changes. People don't like their view change. We don't like our habits changed. But we know that we now know tobacco kills, and we change our habits when we know what's going to kill us. We know what's killing us. It's all around. So where there's a will, there is a way. Right. Okay. Now there are some people who speak quietly and carry a big stick. There are some people who speak quietly and don't carry a big stick because they are so tenacious, charming, and effective. And I'm about to introduce you to someone who you wouldn't immediately think was capable of making the dodgy element of the marine reinsurance industry sit up and take fright. But that's exactly what she's done. On February the 8th of this year, The Guardian splashed with this speaker's victory in helping to protect the endangered stocks of yellowfin tuna in the Indian Ocean. She is head of investigations at Blue Marine Foundation, which is a London-based conservation charity dedicated to restoring ocean health by putting a stop to overfishing. She works to research, expose, and combat harmful and unsustainable practices affecting our ocean. She's very modest. I won't be on her behalf. I am delighted to introduce another heroine for our ocean, Jess Rattle.
Oh my goodness, Lillian, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm also going to try to share my screen, which hopefully I'll be able to do. Great. I hope everybody can see that. Looks good from my side, so I'll just assume that everyone can. Thank you again, Lillian, for that amazing introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here tonight and to be part of this extremely prestigious panel of speakers. My name is Jess Rattle. I am Head of Investigations at the Blue Marine Foundation, and I wanted to start just by briefly explaining who we are at Blue Marine for those who don't know us, as I think our history and our story is quite relevant to the topic tonight. In 2009, a film called The End of the Line was made, based on a book written by our executive director, Charles Clover. And the film showcased to the world, I think for the first time really, the devastating effect of overfishing on fish populations, and highlighted how relentless overfishing was actually pushing bluefin tuna to the point of extinction. And the film was hugely successful, I would say, but after its release, Charles and the other directors kind of thought to themselves, well, we've exposed this massive problem. What are we actually going to do to solve it now? And so as a result, Blue Marine Foundation was born, and we've been working to kind of solve this problem and to protect and restore life on the ocean for more than a decade now. Firstly, by securing marine protected areas, and then also kind of most importantly for my work, by fighting against overfishing. And I think, as we've heard and as we've all, I think, agree, that life in the ocean is really what enables us, enables it to provide for us and to provide all the functions that we depend on so heavily. So while things have improved, I'm happy to say, for bluefin tuna over the years, it saddens me to say that as human beings, we really haven't learnt our lesson very well. And to the contrary, we've actually become better and more efficient at emptying the oceans of fish. And I know we've all been hearing quite a lot about the high seas, and as Hugo mentioned, kind of over the past week, we've really, I think, reveled in the success of the High Seas Treaty. And I think the whole world has realized how vast the high seas are, and how important it is that we protect them. Well, I often refer to the Indian Ocean as the kind of Wild West of the high seas, as it seems to be the ocean with the least monitoring and the least oversight, and as a result, the kind of biggest problems. And I think, as on my slide, there's two highly prized species of tuna, yellowfin and big eye, in the Indian Ocean. They're both overfished, and yellowfin tuna has actually been relentlessly overfished in the Indian Ocean since 2015, so kind of 8 years now, which is terrible. I know it's sometimes hard to envision how important and how kind of impressive these creatures are. And just look at this lovely one. It's my favorite photo. I think this is especially true given that for those of us who aren't lucky enough to kind of go out to sea, the only tuna we're likely to come across in our lives is likely to be in the forms of kind of tins on the shelf of our local supermarket. But as powerful apex predators, which they are important. And in the Indian Ocean, they really are in crisis. And the responsibility and the blame really for this overfishing lies largely, although of course not exclusively, with the EU, I'm sorry to say, because it's by far the largest harvester of tuna in the Indian Ocean. And the EU achieves this through its fleet of industrial, predominantly Spanish and French owned purse seine fishing vessels, which set massive nets, kind of thousands of feet long, around whole schools of fish, which indiscriminately catch just everything in their path, including endangered species like sharks and turtles, in addition to the tuna. So we at Blue have been campaigning against this ongoing overfishing for 3 years now, and I'm pleased to say we have had a few significant conservation wins during this time. As Lillian kindly mentioned, our most recent investigation was published last month. We looked into the role of London insurance firms in enabling these same vessels to go dark in the Indian Ocean by providing them with insurance, despite the fact that they frequently switch off their mandatory tracking systems, sometimes for months at a time. So we really hope that this work will have a lasting impact on the way these fleets are allowed to behave, especially in this overfished region. Now, while these sorts of investigations are kind of important side quests, as it were, they do, I hope, help to improve transparency in fisheries. However, they alone are not going to solve the problem of overfishing in the Indian Ocean, which is why a lot of my time is spent working at the RFMO level, which is to say the Regional Fisheries Management Organization level. Fisheries is full of terrible acronyms, sorry. But just last month, I attended a meeting of the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, IOTC, in Mombasa. And over the 3 days, what we and many of our partner NGOs push really hard for the improved management of fish aggregating devices. And this really is the last acronym, FADs, fish aggregating devices, which are man-made objects that drift across the ocean. They're put in the water by these fleets. They drift across sometimes in places they shouldn't be. And as they go, they attract tuna, but specifically they attract juvenile tuna. And a recent study actually showed that 97% of the yellowfin tuna caught around these drifting FADs in the Indian Ocean are juveniles. So it's really no surprise, therefore, that the stock is very much in the red. So in Mombasa at the IOTC meeting, we pushed really hard for a closure period when no FAD fishing would be allowed each year. And despite some quite heated exchanges and some quite fierce opposition from the EU, a new FAD proposal, which was actually put forward by 11 Indian Ocean coastal states, was adopted by a 2/3 majority in the very kind of the dying minutes of the meeting. And this really was a fantastic win for big eye tuna and for yellowfin tuna, and obviously for the kind of countless coastal communities that depend on these healthy stocks for both for food security, but also for their livelihoods. However, unfortunately, this really rare conservation win, which is what it was, is now under threat because the European Commission announced actually just last week that they're going to be proposing that the EU objects to this new conservation measure, meaning that their entire industrial fleet won't have to abide by these new rules that have been agreed upon, which is obviously a real problem and really disappointing. So we're calling on them not to do that. And just to end off, I was asked just earlier today to think about kind of what actions participants here kind of could take to help solve this problem. And I think the most obvious one for me is to write to your MPs and your MEPs and ministers to tell them really that the world is watching, even far out in the high seas. And the Indian Ocean may be out of sight, obviously, for a lot of us, but we can't let it be out of mind. So I would really urge you to ensure that your voice is heard by those in power and that we remind them that a healthy ocean really needs healthy fish populations in order to flourish. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jess. Am I back on? Yeah. Thank you so much, Jess. Once again, climate justice is also justice for the natural world, and neo-colonial plundering is going to be bad for everyone and everything. Jess, all the acronyms remind me of military jargon, but perhaps that's where we are at. A force that must fight for nature because she can't fight for herself. Okay, so we have to raise our voices, not be frightened of being a pain to people that don't want to hear from us. And crucially, and I think it really does bear repeating, we need to protect our right to peaceful protest, or we cannot raise our voices. If people won't listen to us, if people won't reply to our emails, if we're not allowed to demonstrate, then we are letting ourselves be silenced, and we mustn't do that. So, before I pass on to our final speaker of the evening, I will just mention my own work and why I'm here. I'm a reluctant activist. I mean, aren't we all? We don't want to have to be doing it because we don't want there to be a problem, nor are we toddlers. We have to grow up and see the mess that we've made and start dealing with it. And so the book that is current for me is Pod, which is set in the ocean, in the Indian Ocean, actually. And it concerns many of the things we've talked about. It follows the fate of two rival pods of dolphins, spinner dolphins and bottlenose dolphins. The spinner dolphins driven out of their home water by an oil spill, bottlenose dolphins take it over. And it's written very seriously from the point of view of many marine protagonists. one of which, Harry, is a humpback whale who chooses a lonely life of singing warning about the shipping lanes. Another one of which is Google, a marine mammal asset, grievously wounded in the theatre of operations and abandoned at sea. And I was advised about this part of the story by an ex-Navy SEAL who used to train them, or I would never have dared write it. There are remora fish. There's one remora fish, a Napoleon wrasse, and all their stories weave together because it's one ecosystem. And they believe, the cetaceans believe that this world that is corrupted and changing is because there are ocean demons who are having a war. And of course, we realize who the ocean demons really are. And so if you want to find out more, and I'm also proud to say that this book has passed muster at the Natural History Museum, which is featuring it in the June Evolve magazine and doing a competition. So just like with my first book, which is set in a beehive, I was always thrilled when beekeepers liked it, and I'm always thrilled when marine biologists read it as well. Anyone watching in the States, this is the US cover. So there we are, it's in the shops, and it was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction 2023. So I'm really happy about that. But it's now my great pleasure, and actually I would say it's my honor, to introduce our final speaker of the evening, Captain Paul Watson. Captain Paul Watson is a marine wildlife conservation and environmental activist. He was a founding member and director of Greenpeace. In 1977, he left Greenpeace and founded the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. He's a renowned speaker, accomplished author, master mariner, and lifelong environmentalist. He received the Genesis Award for Lifetime Achievement in 1998 and was named as one of the top 20 environmental heroes of the 20th century by Time magazine in 2000. He was inducted into the US Animal Rights Hall of Fame in Washington, DC in 2002, and was also awarded the Amazon Peace Prize by the President of Ecuador in 2007. In 2012, Captain Watson became only the second person after Captain Jacques Cousteau to be awarded the Jules Verne Award, dedicated to environmentalists and adventurers. In 2022, Captain Paul Watson continues his fight for marine wildlife conservation with the new Captain Paul Watson Foundation. He joins us from New York City. Welcome, Captain Paul Watson, and thank you so much for joining us.
There we go. Thanks. Yes, in 1977, I did set up the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, but with a specific strategy, which I called aggressive nonviolence. And what that meant is we're going to intervene aggressively, but we're not going to hurt anybody, and we never have. But we have shut down literally hundreds of illegal activities on the high seas, most notably driving the Japanese whaling fleet out of the Southern Ocean, which happened, unfortunately, which they're about to go back on, but we did drive them out and saving thousands of whales in the process. In 2022, I was forced out of my organization that I founded, the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, which has been compromised and no longer wishes to adhere to that philosophy of aggressive nonviolence. I was told I was too controversial and too confrontational, and so I was forced out. But that's okay. I set up the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. We have a ship now. We're getting that outfitted. We're going to get a second ship, and the first campaign will be in June to confront the Icelandic whaling fleet. They want to kill up to 169 endangered fin whales, and we intend to stop them from doing that. But looking forward, I anticipate that Japan will be returning to the Southern Ocean. They had 2 harpoon vessels doing so-called non-lethal research down there this year, and they're finishing up the construction of a $67 million factory ship to replace the aging Nishan Maru. So all indications are they're going to return, despite the fact that they were condemned by the International Court of Justice and their whaling activities are condemned by the International Whaling Commission. So we intend to be there in the Southern Ocean when they return, and try to drive them out there once again. It's a little difficult for me to do this because in 2012, Japan issued a red notice on me, for Interpol red notice for conspiracy to trespass. Now, the red notice is for major war criminals, serial killers, and major drug traffickers. I'm the only person in the history of Interpol to be put on there for conspiracy to trespass. But that just, I think, indicates how threatened they are by what we've been doing. So I still believe that the most effective way to deal with these issues is through aggressive intervention. The problem is we do have all these laws. I mean, we just had this high seas treaty, which to me means absolutely nothing unless they have enforcement. Without enforcement, it's just a bunch of words on paper. And, you know, I've attended conferences from the environmental conference in 1972 in Stockholm to Rio de Janeiro in 92 to COP15, which I spoke at in Paris. And what do all of these conferences have in common? Is very little of what has been promised, very little of what has been discussed is actually ever implemented. We do love to talk about the problems and we do love to come up with solutions on paper, but we are very reluctant to actually ensure them, to enforce them. And the reason being is there's so much profit being made from destroying the planet. And it's hard to get around that. I think the most pressing problem facing our future in the ocean is the fact that since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations in the sea. Phytoplankton produces up to between 50 and 70% of the oxygen we breathe and sequesters enormous amount of CO2. And why is this happening? And I think it's happening because of the diminishment of marine species, everything from whales to seabirds to others, which provide the nutrient base for the phytoplankton, the iron, the magnesium, the nitrogen. And when you reduce that nutrient base, you reduce the population of phytoplankton. And the reality is this: if phytoplankton disappears from the sea, we all die. Life on this planet does not go on. I mean, there will be survivors and evolution will kick in again, but we won't be able to survive it, and that's a certainty. I like to look at it this way. If you look at the planet as a spaceship, which is what it is, we're on this incredible voyage around the Milky Way, and every spaceship has a life support system which provides us with the air we breathe, the food we eat, and regulates climate and temperature. And that life support system on our planet is maintained by a crew of engineers, these hardworking engineers that make it all possible for everything to run efficiently. We humans, we're not engineers, we're passengers, but we're having a great time murdering engineers. We like to kill off the engineers. But there's only so many engineers that you can kill before the machinery begins to break down. And I think that that's what's happening right now. And that's why I say when the ocean dies, we all die. We have to learn to live in harmony with all of these other species that make it possible for us to survive. A few years ago, I got a call from Brett Hume from the Fox Network in the United States, and he said, "Did you actually say at a conference that birds, trees, whales, and worms are more important than people?" I said, "Yeah, I think I did say that." And he said, "How could you say something so outrageous? That's the most un-Christian, un-American thing I can imagine anybody saying." And I said, "Well, I said it because they're more important than people. The reason being is very simple. They can live here without us, but we cannot live here without them. We need them. They don't need us." So, you know, we have to stop taking ourselves, regarding ourselves as being so all important that everything was created for us, when in the reality is we're just a bunch of overly conceited naked apes who've become divine legends in our own mind. You know, we have to learn to live in harmony with all of these other species. And if we don't, we're simply not going to survive. And so I get criticized for being too aggressive, for being too controversial. But that's my role. I'm here to piss people off. I'm here to say things that they don't want to say. I'm here to do things that people don't like being seen done, because my clients are not people. I don't care what people think about us. I represent all of those species that are threatened, especially in the ocean. That's who I work for. In 1986, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet and destroyed their whale processing plant. Now, that might sound illegal, but I did turn myself into Iceland, but they refused to put me on trial because what they were doing was illegal. And to put me on trial would have been to put themselves on trial. So that didn't go anywhere. But I had a former colleague from Greenpeace came to me and he says, "I just want to let you know that what you did in Iceland was illegal, unforgivable, and despicable." And I said, "Okay, so what's your point?" And he said, well, aren't you concerned about what people think of you? And I said, no, I'm not concerned at all. We didn't sink those ships for you or any human being. We sank them for the whales. Find me a whale that disagreed with what we did that day. I promise you we won't do it again. But until then, we're going to continue to do that. We target illegal activities. And if people call us radicals or even eco-terrorists for doing that, it means nothing to us. I'm not an eco-terrorist. I've never worked for Monsanto. But the fact is that we do what we do in order to protect all of those engineering species that make it possible for us to continue to live on this planet. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. We didn't talk about ecocide, but obviously that is the great crime of our time, and we need legislation to tackle that at a global level in this crazy world. We're not going to do that tonight, but what a lineup, what incredible speakers. On behalf of Writers Rebel, can I thank everyone who has given their time, their expertise, their passion, their inspiration tonight. Chloe Aregis, Callum Roberts, Susan Richardson, Chris Armstrong, Lucy Gilliam, Harry Ekman, Hugo Techholm, Jess Rattle, and Captain Paul Watson. Thank you everyone who's watching for being part of Oceans on the Brink. I hope you found it as inspiring as I did, and I really hope there can be a transcript of this. Thank you and good night.
We thought the ocean was too big to fail, that we didn't have to protect it. But I've been a witness. We're seeing species after species winked out. We're looking at more than 1 million species lost. Only about 3% of the ocean is protected. That means 97% is open for exploitation. We're on the brink. We need to rethink our relationship with the oceans. Do unto fish as you would have them do unto you.